Hi, I'm Matt Price, features editor at The Oklahoman. I'm here with assistant entertainment editor George Lang, and we have just seen Star Trek Into Darkness, the new JJ Abrams film, the sequel in the Star Trek franchise. George, tell us a little bit about what your takeaways from this movie were.
Oh, well, it's a lot more action-oriented, I think, than the previous one. The 2009 reboot that JJ Abrams launched was an origin story, so it had a lot to cover. This time they kind of dive right in, and so so after there's an event on a planet where Prime Directive, one of the hallmarks of Star Trek is kind of violated. Kirk, who's played by Chris Pine, he's in some trouble with Federation. And so so he's under some disciplinary action when kind of all hell breaks loose, and there's an attack on a Federation facility in London, and this sets off a chain of events where the Enterprise crew has to go after a criminal named John Harrison, who is played by Benedict Cumberbatch, and beautifully played by him. He's the guy who plays the lead in Sherlock on the BBC's BBC series. And so there's a whole lot of action. There's and a certain amount of intrigue as to who this John Harrison is. I gotta say that really the chemistry between all of the main players is just spot on. I mean, we saw that really building with that first installment in 2009, but they've really come into their own. I was really impressed with it. And I really think that Zachary Quinto as Spock really shines in this thing. It's practically his film.
Yeah, that's something that you'll see in the review coming up with The Oklahoman, is that while Kirk, Spock, the lead villain, are all kind of key elements to it, it's kind of Spock's movie, at least at a couple points, and maybe as an overall piece. So
sure, and certainly he's a major part of the climax of this film. So I feel like in a lot of ways, I think one of the stumbling blocks for a lot of people going into the 2009 film is, how am I going to accept all these new actors playing these familiar characters that we have? Well, I don't really feel like there's that much of a learning curve anymore. These guys have really built themselves into these roles. I thought they really carried it off great.
And you've got quite a bit of Trek background. You've got an interesting Trek story. Give people some of your Trek credentials.
Well, it's weird. I was born 2 days before NBC premiered Star Trek, and then according to family lore, the Langs, apparently when they brought this kid home from the hospital, they went home and they watched Star Trek, the very first episode of Star Trek. So there's a really good chance that was the first television I was ever exposed to, was the series. But that was a major part of my life. I mean, I grew up at a time when it wasn't a huge hit when it was on for 3 seasons in the late 60s, but by the early 1970s, it had become this just runaway success in syndication, and that's where I truly discovered it as an 8-year-old kid who wanted to buy all of the action figures that Mego put out, and get the Star Trek bridge and all of that stuff. I was really into it, and throughout my 20s, I was a big Next Generation fan. So but the original series is pretty near and dear to my heart. And so these films, I feel like they're capturing a great deal of the spirit. I mean, tonally it's a little different, and you don't have as much of the deep philosophy that Gene Roddenberry was building into the original series. But I feel like the spirit of it has been retained, and I think that bringing in people like Abrams and really his Lost crew, because you've got Roberto Orci, Alex Kurtzman, and Damon Lindelof. They all wrote this thing. Into Darkness, it really does capture that kind of original spirit of the series.
So kind of a multi-layered portrayal here from some of these characters, so some mystery to dig into.
Absolutely, and so it's like people who have been looking for spoilers. They think that by knowing something about how this movie unfolds is going to tell them everything. It doesn't. We're learning a lot more about who these people are, especially Spock. I mean, there's I think a certain amount of discovery that Zachary Quinto's portrayal of Spock is going through in terms of of reconciling his human side and his Vulcan side. And so there's a lot of that, and also Chris Pine's Kirk is he had that early success with leading the Enterprise crew in the first film, but he still has a lot to prove. There's maturity levels that he needs to reach in order to become a truly effective leader, and so we're starting to see more of that now.
All right, very cool. So Star Trek Into Darkness in theaters now.
Mm-hmm.
And
go see it. Absolutely.
One of the biggest hits of the
fun.
summer, you think? We're going to be...
Potentially. I mean, I think that everybody, who saw it last night, I mean, we heard the cheers. We heard the clapping at the end. I think that this is really going to take off.
All right, very cool. For George Lang, I'm Matt Price. Thanks for watching.